right, it just turned 7. So I'd like to get started with the conversation between experts. Our topic for today, or our theme for today, is it's time to prioritize mental health in the workplace. Thank you to everybody who joined Strengthen Up today. It's lovely to have you here. I'd like to start the conversation round with a short introduction round. So if I can ask you, Karina, to start.
Sure. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Karina Schneider, and I work as a workplace mental health coach and consultant. Specifically, I support leaders build up their well-being capabilities and employees coming from mental health absence return to work successfully.
Thank you so much. On to you, Heidi.
Hello, my name is Heidi Hauer. I'm a leadership coach, and my mission is to bring corporate wellness into the workplace and make sure that it is really the source and the foundation for authentic and purposeful leadership.
Thank you so much. And Lira.
Hi, everyone. It's great to be here. My name is Lira Lowe. I am a conflict resolution and mediation advisor working with family businesses. I help the next generation of leaders improve their well-being and address conflicts.
Thank you so much. And then you've got Charlene, Schmahl, and myself, Naomi, Wernecke, asking the questions during the panel conversation this evening. So without further ado, I'll get started on the first question. And that is, what are the common signs that your employees are struggling with their mental health? And what can managers do to support them in the situation?
Let's start with you, Heidi.
So as a holistic health coach, I love to answer that question with a holistic approach. And that means looking at mental, physical, emotional, and also spiritual science to some extent. So the physical, definitely people feeling or looking not good. In my case, more than 10 years ago, when I was close to severe exhaustion, very stressed, very in my workaholic way, I lost a lot of weight, and people commented on it, and only because they commented I was able to recognize it and do something about it. So it's the physical thing, it's also the mental thing, in a sense of not being able to remember things, having cognitive, you could say maybe cognitive differences or different ways of working as I did before. Emotional also, people are more sad, maybe, or they withdraw. So that's a little bit also the social dimension, not liking to go out to the after work drinks, having more time for themselves. And yeah, so and the spiritual, you could say the question about what are we doing here? What's the purpose of all of this? So those big questions of what's the sense of all that, some more existential questions.
Thank you, Heidi. What do you think?
I could go on further, but yeah.
Karina, Lira?
Yeah, I just maybe want to add one point. I agree to everything that Heidi said, but one of the things I've observed managers worry about is the feeling like they have to be mental health experts to feel like they have a checklist of signs to be looking out for. And that's not exactly what we expect managers to do. But rather, if you understand your employees well enough and if you notice what their patterns are, and then you start to see a change in the patterns like what Heidi described, those then that increases a little bit their confidence that it's time to probably have a conversation with that employee to check in with how they're doing. So I just wanted to share that sometimes we think we have to be experts as managers, and that wouldn't be a realistic or reasonable expectation to have.
Yeah, if I could add to that as well, and a bit of what both Heidi and Karina were saying, I think everything about what Heidi was describing, I think are things we typically see, if you like, not a checklist, but the signs. And what I hear from managers and other individuals are perhaps the more common things. So they'll go, oh, their workplace absences, people are taking sick leave. And that's really common, but that's just way too late by the time people get there, right? That's just a massive symptom of the underlying problem. So I think they're earlier signs that we can pick up on. And they don't necessarily mean people withdraw. That's a really common one, right? That they don't find the same pleasure in the same activities, maybe a bit more emotionally reactive, but we might experience it or observe our behaviors or others in a different way where people are really struggling with their mental health, so they overstretch themselves. So I think an interesting sign that maybe is a bit less obvious is if there's suddenly this hyperactivity and overproductivity, it could actually be a sign of a struggle rather than trying to be really productive. It's actually a cry for help. So I think it does take nuance, like what Karina was saying. It does take the manager really knowing the employees and their colleagues. But I think that's just to add another observation to the mix there.
Thank you so
And
much.
a bit of a complication here these days, in some work settings where it's remote only, you may not really are able to know your colleagues so well. So in the good old days when we went to the office every day, it was far easier to know, oh, my team member typically reacts to a situation like this. So just also for managers to be aware that really being able to understand, see, notice, observe that different behavior or that change in how people show up at work can be harder these days when it's a remote only or a mixed working relationship.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'll just add one quick thing to that, which is I think the added challenge of working remotely is not only maybe lacking that direct touch, but really wanting to jump on problem solving straight away, right? Because without knowing much else of the story, we start to concoct our own story and try to problem solve. So I think if there's one suggestion for managers to help them with their own load is to approach the situation with curiosity and empathy, because it's too hard to make an assumption, and it's often not helpful to jump straight to the problem solving, although all of us feel, or many of us might feel, the need to get there immediately.
So what would you say? What role does organizational health, organizational culture play in mental health? But also, what can companies do to nourish an organizational culture that prioritizes mental health?
I really like this question also because it's complicated, but I think what I would observe, what differentiates companies who take this seriously and not is what decision are they making about well-being at work. You will have organizations who will say, this is just a separate set of initiatives that we have to do if we have the budget for. And you have organizations that will say, it's just the way we work. This is our culture. This is our way of being. And the organizations on the second side who say, well, this is our culture, well-being is our way of working, you will see that their initiatives and their investment isn't just about awareness sessions or training sessions or benefits, but it's also looking at the employee experience. Like, how do they experience work? What do they do when there's workload issues? How do they address individuals who are at risk of job loss? It's very much embedded in their day-to-day employee experience. And that's, I think, a fundamental decision organizations have to make. Do they contribute to well-being and make this part of the way we work? Or is it a strategy with a separate budget line with maybe an owner? And when we're running out of budget, it's the first place that gets cut.
Yeah, I would like to extend that, mentioning that the work culture is super important. Perhaps 3 buzzwords here: work-life balance, psychological safety, and also support systems inside the organization. So the first one, work-life balance. If they say, oh, you don't have to answer the emails after 8 p.m., but everyone else is doing it, and you feel there is no work-life balance appreciated, because the one thing is what you read on the website, but the other thing is what is informally incentivized. So is that a culture where it's okay to go on holiday and not be available 24/7, or is it not? So that's the most basic form of it. And the second thing is that psychological safety. Do people feel encouraged or able to speak up and share their concerns? And that doesn't have to be with only HR, but also with their manager, of course, with their peers, with other people in the organization. So I know a lot of organizations are looking into how can they improve and increase psychological safety, but it's not an easy thing, and it's definitely not a quick fix. And as Karina says, it's also not something that just works with one workshop and an initiative. So I think that's important. The support systems. Is there someone? I mean, some companies really have extremely good also psychological support on site, and where people are then really also encouraged to reach out to. But again, it works with the other two. If psychological safety does not exist, then I might hesitate to go to the company paid psychologist to some extent, because I feel that that can maybe damage my reputation or something like that. So it's a complex thing. Yeah.
Definitely.
If
Lira.
I could add a slightly different nuance, maybe from family businesses, which also create their own organizational culture, you have this whole other beast, if you like. And you might have a family business culture that is created based on the family narrative. So rather than maybe a corporate story around maybe the geographic or the sort of the cultural background of that company, you have a really close and intimate family narrative to the work culture. And that just starts to blend all lines and boundaries around well-being. You have maybe a very typical common story in family businesses is, of course, the hard work and grit that has gone into it. It's your grandfather or your grandmother who has put their work into this, or your parents. And the flexibility or the bandwidth then to talk about well-being just starts to really narrow down and slim down. And to add to that, usually in many of those stories, you have a narrative already created of, we worked weekends, we worked through the school holidays, you saw your parents working when you were doing your homework. And so this glorification of overtime, of working to, your bones, it can be so ingrained in that organizational culture and it's so close because it's personal, that it becomes really hard to tackle. So I find that really challenging, really fascinating, and maybe just another aspect of how maybe a family business culture affects mental health.
But allow me to build on this, because very much what you're talking about is also the way our identity is connected to how we perceive our value at work. And of course, there are some organizations, famous big names and brands or consultancies, who attract people, the alpha people, I would say, or people who really want to outperform themselves every day, and they might have the same issues, and it's even then supported and advertised about how amazing it is to work at that company, because everyone else there is the same and trying to be the higher potential higher achievers, etc. So it can either be, as you say, in the family business world, but it can also create hubs, so to say, of people who have grown up in family settings where it says you are what you produce, or your work, your productivity defines your value as a human being.
Yeah.
With all of the responses that were just given, and especially when we talk about organizational culture, right? It often comes from what is happening in repetition. Heidi, you mentioned it's not a one-off situation. It's something that needs to be done over and over, and this can make an environment good, or this can make an environment a bit more rough. So if you were to be looking at, individuals within the organization, so what would you suggest that some effective self-care practices are that they can integrate into their daily routines to support their own mental well-being? Because while we do often look to the workplace to do this, there's also a bit of accountability on the individual. So is there any practices that you suggest that can become part of the routine?
Yeah. I think for individuals, let's look at it from the individual context first, because there's also kind of self-care from a team and an organizational perspective. But I think for individuals, apart from stating the obvious that the fundamentals are crucial, right? Things like sleep and nutrition and movement, you can't do away with these basics. The other advice I would offer is to look at where your individual vulnerabilities are. It's so easy to pull out a list of 100 self-care activities and feel overwhelmed and feel like you're never doing enough. But if you know where you struggle the most or where you are more at risk, and then target your self-care towards that. So for example, if I know that I have a high tendency to work beyond my hours or to overwork, as we used as an example earlier, how can I integrate self-care throughout my workday by having like 10-minute breaks or making sure I'm not in back-to-back meetings, or that I stick to a clear cutoff where my workday ends, right? If my vulnerability is being at my desk the whole day because I work from home, how do I integrate self-care in terms of movement and making sure I take my walk out of the house? And really looking at that, because I do find that the more targeted the self-care activity is, the higher the chances that it actually really helps and that we actually follow through and implement. As we all know, habits are really hard. So pick the one or two targeted things that will really make a difference for you.
Absolutely. I think they are really targeted activities that can be intentional and really kind of quite conveniently slid into the different parts of our daily routines. So Karina, like what you were saying, that intentional walk, if you're working from home, right, make it a point, almost schedule it, don't do back-to-back meetings. I think little 3 to 5 minute sort of micro grounding exercises, whatever works for you. I think a lot of us here are exposed to different tools and techniques, so I'm not going to list them all, but whatever works for you and can be condensed. The last thing I'll say about this is we often think about the things we can do, and it becomes a list to add. So I'm going to just humbly suggest the things that we can remove that also help us in our workday. So a really common one that is quite helpful for people is realizing that doom scrolling is not helping their mental health at all. It might not even be doom scrolling. It just could be social media that is a distraction, in a way addressing anxiety or boredom or being fidgety at work. But it in some way is impacting our mental health and our attention and energy. So if I could humbly suggest, one other thing is to start to remove those things. So intentionally taking breaks, intentionally like sort of putting a lock on those apps at a certain time can also really help.
Yeah, I'm also a big fan of those small changes that make significant shifts over time if you do it consistently. And one thing I like to recommend always is that mindfulness moment of checking in with your body, to asking yourself several times during the day, what do I need now? Is it a glass of water? Is it a tea? Do I really need the third or fourth cup of coffee, etc.? So it's that mindfulness, but also caring for your body. So, and as you said, there are many, many small things. And at the same time, I'm also a big fan of sometimes putting things massively into perspective. And sometimes I'm shocking my coachees when I'm asking them, are you aware that you've entered a contract with the company? And at the end of the day, bottom line, there is a time commitment you've given for a certain salary you're getting. And that is like, oh yes, really? Is that the case? And getting down to basics and understanding that, yes, I'm selling my time. And that, of course, there is a bit of an over servicing included, etc. But still understanding that the boundary setting means I have the responsibility to do that for myself. And especially with women leaders, I often see that they love and care for the team so much, and they nurture and give and understand and are there for at the weekend. And then sometimes I have a coachee, she gets up at 5 in the morning on Saturday to make sure that she works on all the things her team couldn't do over the week. It's like, wow. And then really explaining them or putting that into perspective. This is not your family. This is not your legacy, because you never know with companies, you might be laid off the next day. So being brutally honest as well with what it is in a corporate setting. Yes, and family structures and family businesses have different dynamics, definitely even more tricky. But to really have that harsh reality check and say, hold on, what's the deal here at the end of the day, and who is benefiting from it?
I love that, Heidi, and I want to extend that with the question, if I may, of at what cost is this overexertion and overperforming coming with, right? Because then you really have to put it into perspective to say, does this come with a feeling of reward and fulfillment, or am I actually losing something by giving more than what I'm actually paid for to do? Not to say that we don't want to give a little bit more, or a little bit extra here or there as engaged employees, right? But there's always that question of cost.
Very true. Yes.
I think one important thing to add, though, as well, is the employee's responsibility, right? The responsibility to be kind to yourself and to acknowledge that asking for help doesn't mean that you're weak. It means that you're willing to work at yourself and grow. Taking the responsibility to be curious about what programs does my company offer, and if they don't offer any programs, what can I do to support my mental health? Can I do some meal prep like learned with Amal, or can I have an accountability buddy that I go for walks with in lunch sessions? I think it also starts with us wanting to be helped, or us wanting to strengthen our mental health, and then saying, hey, how can the company support me in that journey?
And a big advantage of that self-responsibility is also that it forces you to prioritize your work a bit better. So whenever I go through the big mountain of tasks with my coaches, and sometimes I realize how many things they do that are actually outside the job description, where they're just supporting other people because they feel obliged to, but it has nothing to do with what they actually paid for. And it might also not even get them closer to their annual goals. So it's that reflection on, instead of the default mode that let me help here or there. And again, it's something that I observed is a typical thing that we women like to do, is like helping out and who needs support. And really also going back to basics. What is this role for? What does the organization want you to do? What is your annual goal? And let's do all of that first, and then we can talk about all the other things. At the same time, well knowing community building and social interactions are super important, and that makes us happy and working in collaboration. But that is the tricky thing of boundary setting, because sometimes people say, oh, that sounds so good, and saying no is so what a luxury, and I don't know how to do that. But it comes down to, do you know your priorities, and are you actually really putting them into practice?
So are you actually prioritizing your mental health in the workspace, right?
Yeah.
Yes,
I think that's really important, and it's also helped or aided by organizational support, right? So a massive chunk in this is leadership and management, and how those structural sort of individuals and the structure itself is going to help you to do that. So a lot of things I hear from the people I support is, well, my manager's not going to understand anyway, and that's a really common thing across the board. And it might be a mid-level manager, they've got loads on their own plate, etc. They're hitting their own ceiling. So it's a sort of trickle-down effect. So I think there is a lot to be said about supporting leadership in organizations, supporting management, and it's almost, supporting, kind of leading from that, and allowing that cultural shift and transformation, right? In order so that when people prioritize or decide to prioritize their mental health, it's almost as if they have that safe space to do so. even though of course they don't need permission to, but it's a green light, right? This is a place where that is welcome, and that I think just has a bit of a momentum effect on people's motivation.
And I would like to add a new aspect to that conversation. I'm curious to hear what you're thinking about that. But I work with a lot of women in their 40s and 50s, and often they have very high work ethics, and they pick up the load of the team and they care for. And then when I ask, would your line manager do that? They said, oh, no, he wouldn't do that because that is my responsibility. But then we have the new generation who has become, and I think that's a wonderful thing, often quite self-confident about work-life balance and boundary setting. And I really find sometimes that it lands on the shoulders of those people who are not yet fully at the top, but are in that upper middle management layer, and are from a generation that is very committed still to work. And yeah, sometimes I'm quite concerned about that as well, because if at the top there is no support, if from the bottom is a clear like, no, I have to go to my yoga session now at 6 p.m., then it's a tough thing as well for the managers and leaders.
You're hitting an important point, Heidi, which makes me think about why when organizations try to define well-being in one simple sentence for an organization, it assumes there's a one-size-fit-all solution, when actually we need to think about the different personas or categories of employees or employee experiences that we have. So what might be important for the leaders you described, Heidi, could be very different from the well-being needs of the newer generation of employees, right? And so how do we think about looking across the employee spectrum or the employee base and the leadership base, and creating more targeted solutions from that respect?
Yeah, very good.
Very true. And the three of you have brought up such incredible points. And just conscious of time, I'd like to give you the opportunity, right? We're talking a lot about psychological safety and what we should do and what we shouldn't do. But a lot of times this comes a bit too late for many people. So I would really like to round off this session to really just hear your thoughts on what would be your advice, or what would be your sort of statement to people who are tiptoeing around this idea, but maybe not quite there yet, right? Because I think we often fix the problem instead of doing preventative measures. So what would be your final statement to encourage people to really sort of explore how they can be healthier and have a healthier well-being?
I mean, I find it all starts with normalizing talking about emotions. So, and that can be a simple question on Monday morning, how was your weekend? Or also vulnerably sharing as a leader to say, oh, that was a little bit of a tough, a rough Sunday. So, and sometimes I like to kick off in my past team meetings with a brief check-in to say, where are you emotionally? And that is a small door opener for people to feel seen and heard. It of course doesn't solve all the issues, but making it a little bit more normal to get out of that super professional, I have to be the best soldier all the time kind of way would be my number one tip, to say, sneaking in the emotional status quo update here and there, and of course being a role model when it comes to work-life balance as well as a leader.
I think for me, the more that we can create or draw a line between being healthy, therefore I can perform better and more sustainably, the more that I think we'll be willing, either as individuals or as leaders, to actually really invest in the health side of the equation. But if we think that performance will just happen just because it happens, without actually consciously taking care of health, then we're going to see that this is not going to last very long. It will be unsustainable, and it's not scalable for the long term. So that would be my closing words.
Yeah, thank you. I suppose my closing words are going to be one of encouragement for anybody listening to this, or here right now, or watching this recording, which is, I'm guessing you're kind of curious about this topic. And I think if you are, and as Charlene was saying, you're kind of unsure about things at the moment, maybe this is your chance to just dip your toes into new waters and see what it's like, because nobody's going to do it for you. The permission train will never come. And we're talking earlier about taking those decisions on ourselves. And it could be the smallest thing. It could be the tiniest step to just reach out to a mental health professional. It could be the tiniest little discovery call that you don't have to commit to anything else after. But just merely dipping your toes in, seeing how that feels, and taking it from there without any expectation of where this journey will go. And, I don't want to speak for everyone else here because all our journeys are very individual. But I know from my own journey, when I just dipped my toes in and I felt really anxious about it, it just opened a world of really welcoming, great mental health professionals who were empathetic and made me feel normal and really helped me on my journey. So you never know where it'll go. I really encourage anyone who's thinking about it.
Thank you so much, Lira.
And on that note, I would also applaud you for driving this mission in Zurich and in Switzerland, because that's precisely what we need. It's the raising the awareness, normalizing the conversation, and that is pretty much your mission. So I think you are spot on. The answer to your own question.
Thank you so much. On behalf of Up with Naomi and myself, everybody who's attended and everybody who will be watching this recording, your insight is so valuable, and your ability to talk about it with such openness and not in a threatening way, I think is very, very important for people who are a bit hesitant. So we're very, very happy for you to join. We thank all of our panelists, all of our speakers throughout the entire session. Happy World Mental Health Day. Continue going out there and breaking the stigma around mental health. And cheers to you. Thank you, everybody, for joining.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you so